Everyone thought the most important patient in the building was lying in room 814, but they were about to discover the quiet young nurse who checked his for was carrying a past no one could have imagined. The first black SUV rolled beneath the emergency entrance just after sunrise, its polished finish reflecting the pale orange glow stretching across the Chicago skyline. Within seconds, four more vehicles rolled silently into place behind it, their doors opening in perfect sequence as sharply dressed security personnel stepped onto the pavement with calm precision instead of intimidation. Nurses paused behind the reception desk. Visitors lowered their voices, without understanding why. Even the automatic doors seemed to slide open more cautiously as a tall man in an immaculate charcoal suit entered the hospital lobby. His silver tie pin caught the morning light, and his composed expression carried the unmistakable confidence of someone accustomed to commanding every room he entered. Nobody recognized his face, but everyone instinctively stepped aside. He approached the front desk with measured footsteps, resting one gloved hand lightly on the polished counter. "I'm looking for Nurse Evelyn Brooks," he said in a calm voice that was neither hurried nor demanding. The receptionist blinked in confusion. "I'm sorry, sir. Which department?" "She'll know why I'm here." Those simple words settled over the lobby like a question no one could answer. Around him, conversations faded into whispers. A hospital administrator hurried across the marble floor, assuming the distinguished visitor must be connected to an important donor or international delegation. Instead, the stranger politely repeated the same request. "Please tell Nurse Evelyn Brooks that Minjun Kong has come to thank her." The administrator hesitated. Thank her? The name meant nothing to most people standing nearby, but one security officer quietly speaking into an earpiece suddenly froze when he heard it. Another employee searched the visitor log, unable to understand why someone surrounded by such disciplined escorts would travel across the world simply to thank a rookie nurse who had been working at St. Catherine Medical Center for less than 3 weeks. Upstairs on the 8th floor, Evelyn Brooks adjusted the blanket around an elderly patient before checking the medication schedule clipped to the end of the bed. At 27, she still wore the slightly nervous smile of someone determined to prove she belonged. Her navy blue scrubs were neatly pressed, her brown hair tied into a practical ponytail, and her hospital badge still looked almost new compared with those worn by veteran nurses around her. She thanked the patient for his patience after helping him sit more comfortably before quietly moving to the next room. No one watching her would have guessed she had once worked in places where every decision carried consequences far beyond a hospital corridor. No one noticed how naturally she observed every exit whenever she entered a room or how instinctively she memorized faces after seeing them only once. Those habits had become part of her long before she ever learned to start in 4 or read a patient chart. They were simply pieces of a life she had buried beneath fresh scrubs, quiet kindness, and the hope that ordinary days might finally become permanent. Then her pager vibrated. "Nurse Brooks," the message read. "Please report to the main lobby immediately." Evelyn looked down at the screen, her expression remaining perfectly calm, but for the first time that morning, her heartbeat skipped ever so slightly. Somewhere deep inside, a chapter she believed had ended years ago had just found its way back to her. Evelyn slipped her pager back into the pocket of her navy blue scrub top and glanced once more through the glass window of room 812 before quietly making her way toward the elevators. The patient inside had finally fallen asleep, his breathing steady beneath the soft rhythm of the cardiac monitor. She smiled almost automatically, the same gentle expression that had earned compliments from grateful families and barely noticeable nods from overworked physicians. It was the smile everyone expected from the newest nurse on the floor, eager to help, careful not to make mistakes, grateful simply to have a job at one of Chicago's busiest medical centers. The elevator doors opened with a quiet chime. As she stepped inside, 2 senior nurses entered behind her. Grace Mitchell folded her arms and looked Evelyn up and down before letting out a faint sigh. "Administration already wants to see you again? You certainly know how to get attention for someone who has not even finished orientation." Her friend beside her laughed politely. Maybe they finally realized they hired the wrong rookie. Neither woman sounded openly cruel, but their words carried the effortless confidence of people who had already decided where Evelyn belonged. Evelyn simply smiled. Perhaps they just need help with paperwork. Grace shook her head. People survive here by keeping their heads down. The ones who try to stand out usually do not last very long. The elevator reached the lobby level. The doors opened, and the two experienced nurses walked ahead without another glance. Evelyn followed several steps behind, her pace calm and unhurried. She had heard remarks like those since her first day. Too young, too quiet, too inexperienced. She never argued because experience had taught her something far more valuable than winning conversations. Sometimes the safest place to keep the truth was behind ordinary silence. As she entered the main corridor, she noticed something unusual. Security officers who normally remained near the entrance were speaking into radios with expressions that were professional, yet noticeably tense. Visitors had gathered discreetly near the coffee kiosk, pretending not to stare toward the reception desk. Even physicians crossing the lobby slowed their pace, curiosity replacing routine. Hospital Administrator Daniel Hayes spotted Evelyn and hurried toward her. "There you are," he said with visible relief. "There is a visitor asking specifically for you." Evelyn nodded politely. Did he explain why? Daniel hesitated. Only that his name is Minjun Kong, and that he came to thank you. For the briefest fraction of a second, something almost impossible to detect crossed Evelyn's eyes. It disappeared so quickly that Daniel wondered if he had imagined it. "Do you know him?" he asked carefully. Evelyn looked toward the reception area, where the distinguished visitor stood speaking quietly with one of the security supervisors. His posture had not changed since arriving.
Calm.
Patient. Respectful. She recognized him immediately, although 5 years had added a few silver strands near his temples and softened the sharp edges of youthful ambition into measured confidence. Memories threatened to surface without permission, but she gently pushed them back where they belonged. "I met him once," she answered softly. Daniel blinked. "Once." Before she could continue, Grace Mitchell stepped into the lobby carrying a patient chart. She noticed the line of black vehicles outside the glass entrance and quietly whispered to another nurse, "Whoever that man is, he must be incredibly important." Neither of them realized that the visitor they were watching had crossed an ocean not because of wealth, influence, or obligation, but because years earlier a young medical professional had made one quiet decision that forever changed the course of another family's future. Minjun Kong turned as Evelyn approached, and for the first time since entering the hospital, the quiet confidence on his face softened into unmistakable gratitude. Every conversation in the lobby faded into silence as the distinguished visitor took one slow step forward. Instead of offering a handshake, he bowed his head respectfully. It was a simple gesture, but one that immediately caught everyone's attention. Daniel Hayes looked from Evelyn to the visitor with growing confusion. Grace Mitchell stopped walking altogether, her clipboard hanging forgotten at her side. No one in the lobby could understand why a man surrounded by disciplined security personnel would greet an inexperienced nurse with such sincere respect. "Miss Brooks," Minjun said warmly, "I have been searching for you for a very long time." Evelyn offered a small smile that carried both kindness and restraint. "I did not expect to see you again." "Neither did I," he replied. "But there are debts that should never remain unpaid." Daniel cleared his throat politely. "Forgive me, sir, but may I ask how the two of you know each other?" Before Evelyn could answer, Minjun looked toward the administrator with calm eyes. 5 years ago, there was a medical relief mission outside the United States. My older brother became critically ill after an unexpected emergency. Every experienced medic had already been assigned elsewhere. We believed we were out of options. He paused for a moment, his expression filled with quiet remembrance. Then a young medical specialist volunteered without asking who we were, where we came from, or whether anyone would remember her name afterward. Grace frowned slightly. She glanced at Evelyn, then whispered almost to herself, "Medical specialist?" She had reviewed Evelyn's employment file herself. It listed only recent nursing school, volunteer hours, and a short internship. Nothing suggested years of advanced field experience. Daniel seemed equally puzzled. There must be some mistake. Evelyn graduated recently.
Minjun smiled tensely.
graduating recently does not erase everything that came before. Evelyn lowered her eyes for a brief moment. She had spent years carefully building an ordinary life, removing every trace of the chapters she wanted to leave behind. She had never lied on her application. She had simply chosen not to speak about experiences that belonged to another lifetime. Those memories had never been about recognition. They had been about helping strangers survive impossible circumstances, then quietly walking away before anyone asked questions she could never fully answer. You never told anyone, Minjun continued. Even when my family offered to reward you, you disappeared before sunrise. Evelyn answered softly. People needed hospitals more than headlines. Her words settled over the lobby with unexpected weight. The nurses standing nearby exchanged uncertain glances. The quiet young woman they had assumed needed constant supervision suddenly felt like someone they had never truly known. Daniel studied Evelyn's face again, noticing details he had overlooked for weeks. The calm way she observed every room before entering it. The patience that never seemed forced. The steady hands that never shook, even during the busiest shifts. Those qualities had not appeared overnight. They had been earned somewhere far beyond the walls of St. Catherine Medical Center. Yet despite everything Minjun had revealed, one question still lingered unanswered in everyone's mind. If Evelyn had truly walked away from such an extraordinary past, why had she chosen to begin again as an unknown rookie nurse instead of accepting the remarkable life that surely could have been hers? The question lingered in the air long after no one spoke. Evelyn looked at the polished hospital floor for a brief moment before meeting Daniel Hayes's eyes again. Because I wanted to become the kind of nurse every patient deserves, she answered quietly. Not someone remembered for where she had been, but for how she treated the person standing in front of her today. Her voice carried no drama, only calm certainty. Minjun nodded slowly as though he had expected exactly that answer. You have not changed, he said with genuine admiration. 5 years ago, my brother asked why you refused every gift my family offered. You told him that gratitude should never become a transaction. Around them, the morning routine had almost completely stopped. Physicians emerging from the elevators slowed their pace. Visitors waiting near the information desk whispered to one another. Grace Mitchell stood silently beside another senior nurse, replaying every conversation she had ever had with Evelyn. She remembered the young nurse staying late to comfort anxious families, volunteering for difficult overnight shifts without complaint, and always giving credit to others whenever a patient thanked her. Grace had mistaken humility for inexperience. Now she wondered how many extraordinary stories had been hidden behind that quiet smile. Daniel finally spoke. Miss Brooks, your personnel file never mentioned any international medical service. Evelyn answered honestly. The program I worked with no longer exists. Most of the records were sealed because of the regions we served. When I applied here, I listed every certification required by the hospital and completed every examination exactly like every other new nurse. Daniel slowly nodded. She had done nothing improper. She had simply never advertised the hardest years of her life. Minjun reached inside his suit jacket and carefully removed a small wooden box polished to a warm walnut finish. He held it with both hands before offering it to Evelyn. My mother asked me to bring this if I ever found you. Evelyn hesitated before accepting it. She opened the lid carefully. Inside rested a simple silver compass with delicate engraving worn smooth from years of careful handling. There were no diamonds, no gold, nothing extravagant. Beneath it lay a folded handwritten note. Evelyn unfolded the paper and quietly read a single sentence. Thank you for helping our son find his way home. Her eyes softened, and for the first time that morning, genuine emotion appeared across her face. She closed the box gently and held it close to her heart. Please tell your mother, I will treasure this, she whispered. She prayed she would have the chance to thank you herself, Minjun replied. Her health no longer allows long journeys, but she has never forgotten your kindness. Before anyone could say another word, an urgent announcement echoed through the hospital speakers requesting additional staff assistance in the emergency department. The atmosphere shifted instantly as doctors and nurses returned to motion. Daniel instinctively turned toward the hallway, prepared to respond. Evelyn had already started walking in the same direction without waiting for instructions. Her first instinct was not to continue explaining her past. It was to help whoever needed her next. Minjun watched her disappear into the corridor and smiled quietly. The remarkable stories behind Evelyn Brooks had impressed everyone in the lobby, but he knew the greatest measure of her character had never been what she accomplished years ago. It was that, after everything she had experienced, she still chose every single morning to begin again with compassion. The emergency department moved with practiced urgency, every monitor, every rolling cart, and every voice blending into the familiar rhythm of organized care. Evelyn tied her protective gown, sanitized her hands, and stepped into Trauma Room 3 without hesitation. A middle-aged man sat upright on the examination bed, frightened more by uncertainty than discomfort. His wife stood beside him, clutching his hand so tightly that her knuckles had turned pale. "You're safe," Evelyn said gently as she adjusted the blood pressure cuff. "The doctor will be here in just a moment, and we're going to take good care of you." Her calm voice immediately softened the tension filling the room. Outside, Grace Mitchell quietly observed through the partially open doorway. For the first time since Evelyn arrived at the hospital, Grace was not looking for mistakes. She was trying to understand the woman she had completely misjudged. Every movement seemed purposeful, without appearing rushed. Every question was asked with patience. Even frightened patients responded to her with surprising trust. Daniel Hayes joined Grace near the nurse's station, still processing everything that had unfolded in the lobby. "Has she always been like this?" he asked quietly. Grace nodded almost absent-mindedly. "I thought she was simply eager to impress people. Now I think she genuinely sees every patient before she sees herself." Daniel folded his arms thoughtfully. "That is not something orientation teaches." A few minutes later, the attending physician entered and quickly reviewed the patient's chart before giving several routine instructions. Evelyn anticipated each request before it was spoken, organizing supplies with quiet efficiency while never interrupting the physician's concentration. There was no need for dramatic heroics. Instead, she made everyone around her more effective simply by remaining composed. The physician glanced toward Daniel after the examination had ended. "Your new nurse learns remarkably fast," he remarked. Daniel answered with a faint smile. "I am beginning to suspect she learned many things long before she arrived here." Across the department, Minjun remained near the waiting area with only one security officer beside him. His other escorts respectfully kept their distance, drawing less attention than when they had first entered the building. Several visitors cautiously approached him, expecting the reserved businessman to decline conversation. Instead, he answered every polite question with humility. When one elderly volunteer asked whether Evelyn had once worked for his company, he smiled gently.
"No."
"She worked for humanity. My family was simply fortunate enough to meet her along the way." Those words quietly spread through the waiting room. Nurses who had barely spoken to Evelyn during her first weeks now remembered small moments they had overlooked. She always noticed when a patient looked lonely. She always remembered family members' names after hearing them only once. She often skipped her own coffee break if another department became overwhelmed. None of those actions had earned attention because she never expected recognition. As the afternoon sunlight filtered through the tall hospital windows, Grace walked toward Evelyn while she finished documenting patient notes. For several seconds, she remained silent before speaking. "I owe you an apology," she admitted sincerely. "I believed experience was measured by years on a schedule. I never imagined it could be measured by the lives someone quietly touched before arriving here." Evelyn looked up with the same warm smile she had offered everyone else that day. "We all begin somewhere," she answered softly. "This hospital is my beginning too." Grace shook her head with quiet admiration. "No," she replied. "I think today we simply witnessed another chapter in a story that was already extraordinary long before any of us had the privilege of meeting you." By late afternoon, the hospital had settled back into its familiar rhythm, yet something invisible had changed. People who had walked past Evelyn Brooks without noticing her only hours earlier now greeted her with quiet respect. She accepted every kind word with the same modest smile, never lingering long enough to become the center of attention. To her, another patient always mattered more than another compliment. As she organized medication trays at the nurse's station, Daniel Hayes approached carrying a thin folder. "May I ask you something?" he said gently. Evelyn looked up. "Of course." Daniel hesitated before continuing. "After everything you experienced overseas, why start over as a rookie nurse? With your background, you could have accepted positions almost anywhere." Evelyn closed the medication drawer before answering. "Because experience can open doors, but purpose tells you which one to walk through. I wanted to earn this uniform the same way everyone else does. I wanted patients to trust the care they received today, not the stories they heard about yesterday." Daniel studied her expression. There was no pride in her voice and no regret either. She spoke with the quiet certainty of someone who had already made peace with every sacrifice. Before he could reply, Minjun approached carrying 2 paper cups of coffee purchased from the hospital cafe. He offered one to Daniel before keeping the other for himself. "Miss Brooks has always believed that titles disappear faster than character," he said with a faint smile. "That lesson changed my family more than she will ever know." Grace Mitchell joined them, curiosity finally overcoming hesitation. "May I ask what happened after she helped your brother?" Minjun looked toward the large windows overlooking the Chicago skyline as memories slowly returned. "My brother recovered completely. When he finally learned the identity of the young medical professional who stayed beside him through the longest night of his life, he wanted to reward her in every possible way. She thanked him for the offer and declined every gift. She said there were children nearby who needed medicine more than she needed recognition. The following morning, she had already left to care for strangers in another community." Grace listened in silence. She had expected an exciting story filled with dramatic moments. Instead, she found herself moved by something much quieter. Evelyn had never considered kindness extraordinary. To her, it had simply been the next right thing to do. Just then, a little girl wandered into the waiting area, holding a stuffed rabbit almost as large as her arms. She looked around nervously before spotting Evelyn. "Excuse me," she asked shyly. "Are you the nurse who gave my grandpa the warm blanket?" Evelyn smiled and knelt until they were at eye level. "I am. How is your grandpa feeling now?" "He said he feels much better. Because you made him stop being scared." The little girl reached forward and wrapped her tiny arms around Evelyn for a brief hug before hurrying back toward her family. The adults standing nearby watched the simple exchange without speaking. No newspaper would ever print that moment. No award would ever recognize it. Yet somehow it revealed more about Evelyn Brooks than any remarkable story from her past. Minjun quietly smiled to himself. He had crossed thousands of miles believing he came to thank the woman who once saved his family. Watching her comfort a frightened child, he realized she had never stopped doing exactly the same thing. Only the faces had changed. As evening settled over the city, golden light stretched across the hospital corridors, turning polished floors into quiet reflections. The rush of the afternoon had eased, but the conversations sparked by Minjun Kang's visit continued in hushed voices throughout every department. Evelyn seemed completely untouched by the attention. She moved from room to room with the same steady pace, checking medications, answering questions, and offering reassuring smiles that never felt rehearsed. To the patients, she was simply the nurse who listened before speaking. To the staff, she was becoming someone they realized they had never truly seen. Daniel Hayes stood in his office staring at Evelyn's personnel file once again. Every document had been completed honestly. Every certification was authentic. Every recommendation praised her professionalism without revealing the remarkable experiences that had shaped her. There were no hidden awards, no impressive headlines, no carefully crafted resume designed to attract attention. It was almost as if she had intentionally erased every accomplishment that could have placed her above anyone else. Daniel quietly closed the folder. For the first time in many years, he understood that humility was not the absence of achievement. Sometimes it was the decision not to let achievement become identity. Downstairs, Minjun prepared to leave. His security team had already returned to the vehicles outside, yet he remained in the lobby waiting patiently. When Evelyn finished, helping an elderly couple complete their discharge paperwork. She walked over with the same calm expression she had carried all day. "You have a long flight home," she said kindly. "Your family will be happy to see you."
Min-yoon smiled.
"They will be even happier when I tell them I finally found you." He paused before continuing. "My brother wanted me to ask you one question if the opportunity ever came." Evelyn looked at him with quiet curiosity. "What is it?" "He wonders whether you ever regretted walking away from that life. There were opportunities that most people only dream about." Evelyn glanced through the glass entrance toward the fading sunset before answering. "There are many kinds of success. Some people measure it by influence. Others measure it by wealth. I measure it by whether I can go to sleep knowing someone suffered a little less because I was present." Her words were spoken so softly that several people nearby almost missed them, yet the silence that followed made them impossible to forget. Min-joon nodded with deep respect. That is exactly the answer he hoped you would give. Before stepping outside, he reached into his pocket and handed Evelyn a neatly folded envelope. "This is not money," he said with a gentle smile, anticipating her concern. "It contains a letter from my brother. He insisted that only you should read it." Evelyn accepted the envelope with both hands. "Please thank him for remembering me after all these years." Min-joon shook his head. "He never stopped remembering. None of us did." With one final respectful bow, he walked through the sliding doors and disappeared into the evening light. The line of black vehicles quietly pulled away from the hospital entrance without flashing lights or unnecessary attention. Inside the lobby, no one applauded. No dramatic announcement was made. Yet every person who had witnessed the encounter carried away the same realization. True greatness had entered the building wearing an expensive suit, but it had been quietly standing in navy blue scrubs all along. After her shift finally ended, the hospital corridors grew quiet beneath the soft glow of evening lights. Cleaning crews moved silently through empty waiting areas while the last visitors made their way toward the parking garage. Evelyn remained alone for a few moments in the small staff lounge, still holding the unopened envelope that Min-joon had placed in her hands. She rested the wooden box containing the silver compass beside it before taking a slow breath. The room was peaceful enough that she could hear the steady ticking of the wall clock. Carefully, she unfolded the letter. The handwriting was neat, deliberate, and unmistakably personal. "Dear Miss Brooks," it began, "there is not a single birthday, holiday, or family gathering that passes without someone mentioning your name. You once told me that healing is never about becoming someone else's hero. It is about giving another person the chance to become themselves again." I did not fully understand those words until years later. Evelyn paused, her eyes lingering on the sentence. The memories she had spent years placing quietly behind her no longer felt heavy. They simply felt complete. She continued reading. "Because of your kindness, I returned home to my parents. I was present when my daughter was born. I watched my son take his first steps. I learned that the greatest victories are not measured by power, but by the ordinary moments we are fortunate enough to keep. Every one of those moments exists because one compassionate medical professional chose to care for a stranger without asking who he was. My family can never repay that gift, but we will spend the rest of our lives honoring it by helping others whenever we have the opportunity." A single photograph slipped from the envelope onto the table. It showed a smiling family gathered beneath blooming cherry trees. Parents, children, grandparents, all standing shoulder to shoulder with genuine happiness reflected across every face. There was nothing extraordinary about the picture except the quiet truth it represented. Evelyn smiled softly as she realized she recognized none of the children. They had been born after the day she walked away. Entire lives had unfolded because compassion had quietly continued its journey long after she believed her part had ended. She placed the photograph back inside the envelope with great care. A gentle knock sounded at the doorway. Grace Mitchell stood there holding her purse, looking almost hesitant to interrupt. "I was heading home," she said, "but I wanted to thank you." Evelyn looked surprised. "For what?" Grace smiled warmly. "Today reminded me why I became a nurse in the first place. Somewhere along the way, I became busy measuring schedules, promotions, and experience. I forgot that every patient is somebody's entire world. Evelyn closed the envelope and stood. We all need reminders sometimes. Grace nodded. You never tried to prove anyone wrong. You simply kept doing the right thing until the truth spoke for itself. The two women walked together toward the employee exit, their footsteps echoing gently through the quiet hallway. Outside, the cool Chicago evening welcomed them with a light breeze carrying the scent of fresh rain. Evelyn slipped the silver compass into her coat pocket before looking once toward the darkening skyline. She did not see herself as someone with an extraordinary past. She simply believed tomorrow would bring another shift, another patient, another opportunity to choose kindness again, and somehow that ordinary decision had become the most remarkable part of her story. The following Monday morning, St. Catherine Medical Center looked exactly as it always had. Ambulances arrived at the emergency entrance. Physicians hurried through the hallways with tablets in hand. Families gathered beside waiting room windows, hoping for encouraging news. The remarkable visit from the previous week had already become another story whispered between shifts, yet its quiet influence remained in ways no one could measure. Grace Mitchell now introduced every new nurse with patience instead of skepticism. Daniel Hayes had started spending more time walking the patient floors instead of remaining behind his office door. Even the physicians noticed that conversations among the staff carried a little more kindness than before. Without intending to, Evelyn Brooks had changed the culture of the hospital simply by living according to the values she refused to compromise. For Evelyn herself, however, nothing truly felt different. She arrived before sunrise with a cup of coffee in one hand and the familiar silver compass resting safely inside her coat pocket. It was no longer a reminder of an extraordinary past. It had become a quiet symbol of the direction she had chosen every day since. During her rounds, she stopped beside an elderly woman recovering from surgery who seemed unusually anxious. The woman admitted she was afraid of returning home alone. Evelyn pulled up a chair, listened without rushing the conversation, and helped arrange additional community support before the patient was discharged. Later that morning, she congratulated a young father whose newborn daughter had just entered the world. She celebrated with a family receiving encouraging test results and comforted another family facing a longer road toward recovery. None of those moments would ever appear in medical journals or evening news broadcasts. Yet each one carried the same quiet truth that had guided her life for years. Healing was never limited to medicine alone. Sometimes the greatest treatment another human being could receive was the certainty that someone genuinely cared. Near the end of her shift, Daniel found Evelyn updating patient charts. I have been thinking about something, he said. Our hospital presents an annual award for exceptional service. I would like to nominate you. Evelyn looked up with her familiar, gentle smile. I appreciate that more than you know, but I would rather see the recognition shared by the entire nursing team. No patient is ever cared for by one person alone. Daniel laughed softly before shaking his head with admiration. I should have known that would be your answer. As he walked away, he realized that true leadership did not always stand behind a podium or carry an impressive title. Sometimes it quietly walked hospital corridors in comfortable shoes, carrying patient charts and remembering every name. Months later, visitors entering St. Catherine Medical Center occasionally noticed a small framed quotation displayed near the nurse's station. No one knew who had suggested placing it there, and no name appeared beneath the words. It simply read, "The strongest hands are often the gentlest, and the greatest honor is found in serving others with humility." Staff members passed the frame every day without giving it much thought, but patients often paused to read it before continuing down the hallway. Somewhere across the Pacific Ocean, a grateful family continued to tell future generations about the compassionate medical professional who expected nothing in return. And in Chicago, the woman at the center of that story continued living exactly as she always had, proving through ordinary acts of kindness that dignity never demands attention, compassion never loses its value, and the quietest people sometimes leave the deepest mark on the world. And that day, the world remembered what dignity looks like.